Today I want to talk about barrel bedding for the Precision AR-15. So everybody's probably heard about bedding a bolt action rifle to the stock for improved precision, but have you heard about bedding an AR-15 rifle? Bed what to what? The first I heard of this idea was years ago on ar15.com, and it made a lot of sense to me. So I tried it and I got good results. Then I tried it again and I got good results again, and so now I do it for every single rifle build. What follows now is my method, and it's certainly not the method. Many will argue it's not even necessary, and they're probably right if you're just assembling a blaster or a mil-spec rifle. However, if you want to maximize your rifle's precision ability, every variable matters. So please watch and think about it. So the goal is to assemble the upper receiver and the barrel in such a way as to get good results downrange. So what is barrel bedding? The purpose is not to precisely match the AR-15 rifle's action to the stock, like on a bolt action rifle, but to precisely fit the barrel extension to the upper receiver, making them function as one solid unit. On an AR-15, the barrel is held on to the front of the upper receiver by a threaded barrel nut that clamps down on this flange here that will then rest on the front face here of the upper receiver. What the bedding does is the bedding eliminates and fills any void that might exist then between the barrel extension and the upper receiver. And as you can see in my picture here, I have a little bit of a gap then in that area. If you've ever assembled an AR upper, you're familiar with the barrel just sliding right into the upper receiver. Was there any side-to-side wobble between the two of those, even after the barrel was fully inserted? If you had held the receiver in your hand and turned it upside down, would the barrel have fallen out? If so, you have gaps between the two of them. In fact, if you can easily remove the barrel from the receiver by hand, you have a gap. And gap means possible wobble during the firing sequence, or that your rifle's not pointed, your barrel's not pointed perfectly straight. So the goal then is to remove this gap. Now, it may be so small of a difference not to matter, but if you want the best from your build, you need to remove that gap. But before I do that, I use an inexpensive tool to lap and square the front face of the upper receiver right here. Make that perfectly square with the inside of the upper receiver in the bolt carrier raceway. If the front face of the receiver is not squared, the barrel, when clamped to the receiver, will also not be square to the inside diameter of the upper receiver. Even if the bare metal upper receiver is machined with the face perfectly square to the central axis, the anodizing process can leave the front surface rough and in need of some attention. So the tool that I use to square up the front face of the upper receiver is this one here, made by Brownells. It's about $35. And I've also got some 220 grit lapping compound that I put on with a Q-tip. 220 grit's a bit aggressive. You can probably get away with 400 grit or 600 grit. But to lap the front face, you insert the tool into the upper receiver and you put a bit of abrasive on this surface right here, and then you fully insert it, and then you are able to spin it, rotate it, and it will polish and smooth out any rough spots and make sure that the upper receiver face is perfectly square. Now, it actually comes with a little stud that you can chalk it up in a drill, but I don't do that. You don't want wobble in the drill to cause problems, and you certainly don't want to overdo it and do it too much. So I will do it by hand. So insert it in there, and then I rotate this around by hand. Lap the front face just enough to take off most of the black surface anodizing, but not all of it. You'll have to remove the tool, carefully wipe off the abrasive, and check how much progress you've made, but be patient. It won't take very long. I do mine until most, but not all, of the dark anodizing is removed from the front face. As you can see right here, it's kind of bright and shiny, but as I go around to about the 11 o'clock, there's still just a little bit of anodizing left. You don't want to overdo it, and you want to do it just enough to square it up and make it a smooth surface. Okay. Now, once the upper receiver face has been squared, now I actually do the barrel shimming if necessary. If you've got a tight upper receiver to barrel extension fit, you may not need to do anything. But I will use then stainless steel shim stock to fill in that void. I purchased a can of it, 1/1000th of an inch. 6 inches by 50 inches actually makes a lot of barrel shims, so this will probably last me quite a long time. So I cut a strip just wide enough to fit between the index pin here and not stick out too far and interfere with the feed ramps below. And I usually cut it long enough to go all the way around, but I generally don't need that much, and I trim it back. So then I carefully wrap it around the receiver extension and begin to insert the barrel into the receiver. Be careful though, because sometimes it can be sharp and cut you. Might even want to use gloves. So the full length strip here is usually too much, and I have to begin cutting it down shorter and shorter and shorter to find the exact right size. Now my instinct here is to put this gap between the ends at the top, but gravity will naturally pull down on the barrel and you don't want any gap at the top or the bottom. So put the gap between the ends of the shim on the side. So I keep trimming the length of the shim strip down until I can get the extension inserted about halfway in before it begins to become difficult to do by hand. So at that point then, I will then add a little blue or green Loctite to the joint to fill in any remaining void as I continue to insert the barrel. The thread locker here doesn't actually lock the barrel in place like it does with screws, but it seeps into the remaining crevices that might still exist and hardens into something solid. So at this point, wiggle and push and get the barrel fully seated. If you can't fully do it by hand, that's probably a good thing. What I will use then is a rubber, not metal, but rubber mallet to lightly tap on the muzzle end to get the barrel fully seated in there. Now, if it takes more than just a light tap, you probably have too much shim stock in there and you need to remove some to make it just a little bit easier. So light taps with a rubber mallet, or you can use a heat gun, and you can use a heat gun to heat up the upper receiver and have it expand just a little bit, give it some room to go in. If you can take a look right here, you see that my index pin's just about ready to be fully seated, but you can see the shim stock right in there between the upper receiver and the barrel extension. Okay. Now, once the barrel is fully seated, try to pull it out by hand. If you can't do that, then you've bedded it correctly. And you may say, well, what do you do if you do want to remove it? Well, okay, get yourself like an inch diameter piece of wooden dowel and put it in the back. Take the action block, or take the receiver out of the action block, and you can put a section of 1-inch wooden dowel into the backside and then push the barrel out from the back. So the last thing I do, and don't forget this step, is you need to take a Q-tip or some kind of a cleaning patch and clean all the Loctite off of the threads, because if you install the barrel nut with Loctite on the threads, you will lock the barrel nut down, and that's not good. So once that's all done, install your barrel nut and then finish the build. Now, you certainly want some evidence that it works right. Well, there's no guarantee, of course. There's many different things that affect a rifle's precision. Play between the barrel extension and the upper receiver is just one of those things, but the more variables we can eliminate, the better the results. So here is a 18-inch Faxon barrel that I assembled on this upper receiver using these techniques. Notice it's not free-floated. And when I put a 10 power scope on it and shot it from the bench, as you see there, here are my results. This is using Federal Gold Medal Match 223 77 grain Sierra Match King. This is 10 shots at 100 yards, and my extreme spread was just a little more than an inch. And my average to center, the mean radius, was about 1/3 of an inch. That made me very happy. But don't just take my word for it. Do a YouTube search for Joe Carlos with American Gunsmithing. He's got a video discussing how the Army Reserve shooting team started using this technique on their match rifles. It's a very informative video, and where I got most of these techniques from. So comment below, and be good and be safe.